All right, let's see if we can finish at least the year 2000 of Putin's rule. Uh, this video will begin May of 2000, which you can see is when the president, by presidential decree, this does not require any support of the Duma or the Federation Council, the upper house of the Federal Assembly. It is the president issuing a directive that has the force of law. Putin issues a presidential decree in which he creates 7 federal regions, and he appoints a plenipotentiary representative, someone who represents the president's interest in these various 7 regions. Now, interestingly enough, these 7 regions follow the 7 military districts that the Russian Federation is divided into. And the people who are appointed are 5 out of the 7 appointees are either former military officers or FSB officers. So this has got a heavy security element. People who are going to be loyal and carry out the president's orders. This is an extra constitutional directive on his part. And this is the first time that we've talked about the Siloviki, Siloviki, the Siloviki. These are people of force, coming from the Russian word silva, which means strength. These are the military types or the FSB types that form a sub-element of the Putin regime, people that he has had experience with, either when he was in East Germany, or coming up through the KGB, or who he has come across and admires and thinks he can trust in the military of the current FSB. In 2010, they added an 8th district for the North Crimea, and in March 2014, they added another district. In 2010, they added one for the North Caucasus. In March of 2014, they added a new federal region for Crimea. The purpose of this, quote, reform is to put in the various regions somebody who's completely loyal to the president, completely dependent upon the president for their authority, and who can oversee actions within the 7 regions to be sure that the various governors in these regions and political leaders in the legislature and in the executive of the regions, of the districts, follow out presidential orders and laws that come down from the president. This is an effort on his part to gain control over the regions. This is the old perennial problem of any government, a center-periphery battle. But now Putin is going to control the regions, hopefully by the means of these 7 representatives. And also in that month, I'm sorry, it's actually June, or in that month of May, there was a raid on Guzinski's Media Most headquarters. And you remember Guzinski's one of the oligarchs. It was on a sheet that I gave you in the Yeltsin years. And Guzinski has been very critical of the Putin government, and particularly critical of the way the war is being conducted in Chechnya. And in June 13th of 2000, Guzinski is arrested on the charge of embezzlement. Now, remember, when you think back how all of these oligarchs made their money, everybody could be accused of some crime. In fact, I forget who said this, but some wag said that every great fortune is based on a crime. So Guzinski has been very critical of Putin. He has not appreciated the fact that Putin wants to treat the oligarchs differently. He's gone after Putin. He gets arrested, and he is released, but only released after he agrees that Gazprom, for which he owes a substantial debt, this is the gas monopoly, Gazprom can buy his company very, very cheaply. And as soon as that deal was made, Guzinski gets out of Russia as soon as possible. The first of the oligarchs to flee the country. Okay, uh, in July of the year, Putin goes on national television to announce that he is going to continue to clamp down on the oligarchs and rebellious governors to see that they follow the orders of the central government and that they don't go off on their own and carry out their own agendas. And in July, he meets again with the oligarchs, and some people think this is when he essentially cut a deal with them. And some people call it the new social contract with the oligarchs. And the deal was that they are going to be able to keep all of their possessions if they stay out of politics and if they resist from criticizing the president and his administration. So Kaczynski is one who clearly was not going to follow this in July. By July, he's out of the country. But the message is pretty clear to the other oligarchs. Stay in line, follow the president's orders, stay out of politics, and you can keep your vast financial, banking, industrial empires that you've been building. But if you get involved in politics, the government will come after you. That's the social contract with the oligarchs. And to that other element of resistance, the independent governors of the various regions who are sitting in the Federation Council. And the Federation Council, this top, more like the Senate, the smaller body of the Federal Assembly, is largely become a lobby for the interest of the regions. So the governors who sit there and the heads of the legislatures in the regions spend all of their time in Moscow, pressuring, intervening, acting on behalf of their special interest in the regions. And Putin wants to get a control of this. So what he is proposing is that in the future, governors of the regions have to meet a vetting process by which they have to have the approval of the president of the Russian Federation. Of course, the delegates, the existing delegates to the Federation Council are opposed to this. They don't want to lose the perks of free government-sponsored apartments in Moscow, and particularly the issue that they have immunity from prosecution while they sit in Parliament. And that's a big thing, because as I said, every politician, every oligarch, anyone with influence has got some crimes in their background that the government can expose and charge them at any time. The Duma agrees with the president on this, and they threaten to override any veto by the Federation Council of this new reform that Putin is pushing. And Putin also makes a statement that he would order the government to investigate any criminal activities of any of these governors who are resisting this change. And they cave in at this point, and this means that in the future, the governors of the regions of the Russian Federation are going to be indirectly elected by the parliament. Sorry about the phone, but I can't go over there and get it, or I'll cut this video off at only 9 minutes. All right, so now Putin has made it clear what he expects the role of the oligarchs to be, and that is to be subservient to the president. And he's got an example of Kaczynski as one, and he has gone after the governors of the various regions to put them under control from the central government by means of these representatives to the regions that he has passed. All right, so this then takes us to what many Russians think of as the terrible month of August. It's often very hot in Russia in August. It's not surprising. And unfortunately, August tends to be a month when a number of disasters tend to occur in the country. Uh, this August leads off with a bombing in Pushkin Square in Moscow, one of the big squares of the city. 13 people killed, 118 injured, and Chechen rebels take the credit for this attack in Moscow, again signifying the importance of how Putin is going to have to deal with Chechnya. On August 12th, there is the sinking in the Barents Sea of a submarine with a crew of 118 members on board. And there is no rescue attempt. And there appears to be some survivors in an airlock part of the ship because you can hear or sonar can pick up a rhythmic pounding that seems to indicate that there are survivors here. Now, if an event like this could happen in a Western-style democracy, you would expect the president or the prime minister to appear on national television and say that all resources are being um, put to the task of rescuing these people. Putin is on vacation. He's had a tough few months as president and feels he is in the need to relax and recoup. So he is down um, at one of his summer homes, and for 4 days, the president says nothing about this event. And the government's efforts at rescuing these individuals is a fiasco. They're not able to rescue them. And Boris Berezovsky, again, this oligarch, uses his media empire to go out and express the incompetence of the government, the fact that the government has lied about the event, said that first of all there was no survivors. Then they indicated there were survivors. Then they were going to get the survivors out. They haven't been able to get them out. They blamed the West for running into the submarine and sinking it. All these lies were being spread, typical of the way the Soviet Union dealt with the tragedy. And then Putin comes back and later meets with the families of the victims of this disaster. And the families accuse him of negligence, incompetence. He gets very angry. He's in a screaming match with the survivors because they are standing up to him, and he is not used to that. This then leads the Putin administration to go after Boris Berezovsky, and he sees the writing on the hand wall and gets out of town, gets out of Moscow, gets out of Russia, and goes to London and starts living in one of his homes in London. Third event that's on the page there is the Ostankino fire. The Ostankino is a structure. It is the second highest structure in the world at the time. It's twice the size of the Eiffel Tower. It is a radio and television tower on a hill in Moscow, and it can be seen from almost anywhere in the city. And there was a fire, 4 people die, and this is just thought to be piling on the problems of the Russian government. All right, moving on to September. You have Putin proposing the creation of a new entity called the State Council. And this is supposed to be a quasi-republican body that is appointed by the Russian president. By now, the Federation Council members are appointed by the regional legislature, and the State Council is an entity that is one of a number of entities that are going to be created by Putin to kind of bridge the gap between the central government and the population. A way to give key elements in the population, key groups, interest groups, if you will, fledgling interest groups at least, a way to express their views through these entities that are created. In November, we find the surprising thing that one of Putin's senior economic advisors, a guy named Ilyanov, is attacking Putin's prime minister, a man named Mikhail Kasyanov, who was a former finance minister and a first deputy prime minister, and now he is Putin's first prime minister in Putin's first government. And he's being attacked by Putin's senior economic advisor. Now, Kasyanov has a reputation for being, they called him 10% Misha, a nickname for Mikhail. 10% meaning that he always had his hand out taking 10% bribes of anything that he could support. And everybody seemed to know this, but nobody would talk about it in public. And Ilyanov seems to be something of a loose cannon because the next month he goes after Chubais for giving in to the oligarchs and not standing up to them. And this generates a lot of controversy in the press, what's going on here. But more importantly, it indicates how fluid the situation is in Russia in the year 2000. However, before the year comes to an end, we have the formal end by the Russian government of Kremlin Gate, the series of investigations associated with the Medvedev scandal, and Pavel Borodin and Yeltsin's family over the money to renovate the palaces and buildings and churches in the Kremlin. Just ends. Nobody's found guilty. Pavel Borodin goes on later to play an important role, sub-role in the Putin administration. But Putin makes one gesture that is pretty important because he puts in a new national anthem. And a lot of people were grumbling about this, particularly communist and nationalist and older people in the country, that Boris Yeltsin had put a new national anthem in to show how the government was breaking with the Soviet past. And what Putin approves is a national anthem that has the same music of the old Soviet national anthem, but to new words, to try to bridge that gap. And this becomes a pattern of Putin trying to acknowledge both the Tsarist and the Soviet past, but featuring only the best aspects of that past, and that he is a continuation of former administrations. All right, so let's turn the page and go on to the year 2001. All right. Well, one of the things that happens early in the year is that Berezovsky, who's in exile, self-exile in London, sells his media empire to Roman Abramovich, who's one of these newer oligarchs who's been up and coming. And if you are soccer fans, you know the name Roman Abramovich because he goes on to buy the Chelsea Football Club in England, one of the more prestigious and old or top clubs of English soccer. But in 2001, the year begins in March for Putin restructuring the government, replacing the defense minister and bringing in Sergei Ivanov, a man he has known through his working in the KGB, a man that Putin trusts very closely. He brings in a new Minister of the Interior. He brings in Boris Gryzlov. Gryzlov is the chairman of the Unity Party's faction in the Duma. In other words, he's the leader of Unity in the State Duma. These are people that are close to Putin and are going to respect his wishes. And then, also, he announces that the atomic minister is being replaced. And this is because there was a committee in the Duma led by the communists that was investigating the atomic minister on charges, surprisingly, of bribery. And Putin jumps on this and uses this as the excuse to get rid of the atomic energy ministry and again put somebody in that is close to him. In April, Gazprom takes over the formal control of the media empire NTV, the television stations that were formerly owned by Guzinski. And this becomes one of the national TV networks on TV, but now under the control of allies of Putin. In May, um, Putin also appoints a new head of Gazprom, Alexei Miller. Now, Miller is an interesting Russian name, but this goes back as far as Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, when they were encouraging the importation of Westerners to come and live in Russia, particularly Catherine, bringing in a number of Germans, because remember, she was a German princess before she became a Tsarina. So bringing in these hardworking German peasants to try to be an inspiration for Russian peasants. And Miller is a descendant of one of those so-called Volga Germans. And he is now the head of Gazprom. And he is a close ally of Putin's. And Putin calls upon Gazprom to reform itself, to do away with any corrupt management that's been in place. And this is posturing on his part, but also it's part of his effort to get people that have been in these positions out and bringing in people close to him. In June, we have that first meeting of President Putin and President Bush in Slovenia, where George Walker Bush looks into Putin's eyes and sees a man that he can deal with. And what is important about this is it gets back to that notion of who was Putin as a KGB agent. This recruiter, a man who could talk to people, find weaknesses, and exploit that. And Putin made a very ostentatious effort at showing his cross that supposedly his grandmother gave him when he was baptized as a baby to the Christian Bush. And Bush thought that this was a sign that these two men could work together. In September, we all know the tragic day, September 11, 2001. Putin is the first of the foreign leaders to contact the United States. States that we are with you. He is with the United States in this war against terror, because Putin is looking, he believes that the attack on the United States by the Islamic terrorists, that he could form an alliance with the United States against this fundamentalism that is sweeping Islam and threatens the Russian control in Chechnya, as also threatening the Central Asian republics that are now independent, but that Russia has very close ties with them and are predominantly or overwhelmingly Muslim in the population. So he's really expecting in 2001 that these two sides are going to begin to work together. And you may remember that when the United States decided to attack the Taliban in Afghanistan, it was through Russian airspace. It was the Russians providing intelligence for us. It was the Russians that had provided air bases that were going to be used for resupply of our troops. All of this Putin carries out over the objections of his defense ministry. The generals are not happy with having American military forces this close. But Putin, I think at the time, really hoped that Russia and the United States could become allies in the war against terror. The next month, he's invited to the United States, and he almost didn't go because Bush invited him to come to his ranch. And Putin thought this was kind of a slight. This was kind of an insult. He wanted to go to the White House and have a big formal ceremony. But some of his aides who knew more about the United States said, this is really a big deal when a president invites you to his private home. And here you can have an intimate, personal, build up this relationship that's necessary if this war on terror is going to be fought by an alliance of Russia and the United States. And so Putin relented and comes to Texas and, sits through the barbecues and the square dancing and the country music that goes on at the ranch that seems to solidify this growing alliance between Putin and Bush, between the United States and the Russian Federation. Also, in November, there is another new organization created called the Civic Forum. And this is a institution that the Putin government establishes that brings together over 3,000 individuals from various groups within the society, particularly non-governmental organizations, to discuss issues of concern on the national level and to discuss issues that are of concern for these NGOs. Now, a number of these non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that had Western sponsorship and Western support, as well as some of the ones existing, like Memorial, was created to keep alive the memory of the victims of Stalin's purges and the Stalin Gulag. A number of these groups were very reluctant to join the Civic Union because they thought that this would be an opportunity by the government to rally societal support for his policies, or that it would be, at worst, to draw this fledgling civil society. Remember what civil society is, the non-governmental groups, to draw them into the government structure and make them an extension of the government, the way organizations were in the Soviet era. But most of the non-governmental organizations do agree to participate in this. Um, and this becomes another effort at trying to bridge the gap between the central government and the civil society. In December, Putin talks about the need to deal with corruption in the society. He talks again about the dictatorship of law, and they announce the merger of Unity and the remnant of the party that Lushkov and Primakov ran in the 1999 Duma elections, uh, Fatherland All Russia, and you can put these two together and call this new party United Russia. United Russia will go on to be the party of power, and I just in the last video talked about the role of political parties and parliamentary operation, so you want to remember that. And before I leave this videotape, I skipped over how I could do that. I don't know, but I skipped over July. July 2001, the law on political parties that is passed. And this is an effort by Putin to impose new requirements, new restrictions on political parties. If you remember in the heydays of the Yeltsin years, political parties are forming overnight. You remember my discussion of the Beer Drinkers Party. And disappearing overnight, too. And if somebody got elected from this party, um, that party often had no representation other than a few people, possibly in the Duma, had no real structure, and the chapter in the Sacco book that I talked about last time talks about the problems of this type of loose coordination and the nature of these parties, so you want to be sure to look at that. But one of the requirements was that there had to be at least 10,000 members to be registered as a political party, and parties had to register. They had to meet certain requirements. They had to have at least 100 members in half of the regions of the Russian Federation. They could not engage in extremist activity, surprisingly, given the fact that the Liberal Democrats were a neo-fascist party, I think. This is an interesting restriction on them. You could not form a political party based on a particular occupation. You could not base a party on a particular racial group or a national group or a religious group, because he wanted the parties not to have these bases, but to be more representative of the population. And he defined the type of financial support that parties could receive. The fear being that some of these parties were getting aid from Western political parties. The Democratic Party of the United States, the Republican Party of the United States had created foundations in the post-Soviet era to try to help spread Western political ideas and values, and these consultants that were in Russia were helping these various parties be established. and grow. And this was thought, particularly by Putin, to be a serious threat to his regime. So I'm ending here now at the end of the year 2001, and the next video will begin 2002. Again, I do this because I find it easier to upload without problems these short videos, so I'm going to stop this one now.